morning, PSC. It is so good to have so many of you here and seeing these numbers rise at the bottom of my screen. It's amazing. No question, it would be much better if we could be in person, but this is something, at least, we get to interact, and in some ways, many more of us can be in a meeting together. So technology has some minimal benefits, let's just say. To say that this last 18 months or so have been difficult would be a real understatement. But all of you, PSC faculty and staff, have risen incredibly to this job. And as we move forward and start a new academic year, questions of health and safety remain paramount. And that's where today's meeting comes in. And we hope we'll leave with some questions answered and a way to work together collectively to meet that challenge. I'll ask my colleague and comrade Sharon Persinger to say something.
I just want to echo welcome. I see the numbers coming up to close to 1,000. I am happy that with the technology, we're able to talk with all of you and answer your questions. I know that there has been a great deal of confusion from messages from various levels of administration, and we hope to be able to bring some clarity and also hope to invigorate you to struggle for the things that are still remaining to struggle for, to make sure that we return to a safe workplace. So I think we should, as I said, there are many questions, there are many things to say, and so I'm just going to go ahead and turn things over to Andrea.
Great, thank you. Hi, everyone. Okay, I'm unmuted. I have a few things to cover for all of you. It's great to see you all tonight. In this meeting, we're going to abide by a short community agreement for tonight's chat that I'll read now. It says, I commit to engage in conduct that would not be considered discriminatory, harassing, bullying, or intimidating. I will respectfully listen and respond to the contributions of others. I will refrain from using all caps. I will refrain from reposting an unreasonable number of messages. I will seek to understand others and assume best intentions in all interactions. So this is how the event will run. This is a webinar, so you don't see yourselves, you don't see any others besides the panelists. It's unfortunate, it is great when we can see everyone, but because of the high turnout, this was just the best way to go. The chat is not for questions that you want answered by the panelists. That's one of the most important things to remember, because I know our inclination is to run that way. We thank you very much for your thoughtful, excellent pre-submitted questions. We read all of them, grouped them into topics, and noted which were frequently asked as we prepared for tonight. So we'll respond to those that were recurring or on a similar theme in a few ways. Some will be addressed in Barbara's opening remarks, others will be read out loud during the meeting, and some members will come on screen to ask their own questions. We'll ask questions that you put in the Q&A during the meeting with live written replies as best we can, and everyone will be able to see the question and the answer to those questions we can respond to. For those questions if we don't get to all of them live tonight, we will be creating an FAQ page on the PSC website in the coming weeks, and it will be updated throughout the summer. And if you have technical issues other than not being able to see yourself, write a message in the chat or email Janet Kwan, one of our organizers. Throughout the meeting, the staff will be sharing a link to resources such as Janet's email address, tonight's agenda, and information on how to get involved with the PSC health and safety organizing and legislative work. So check that link throughout the meeting, and it should be able to help you. So lastly, I'd like to take just a minute to thank President Bowen on behalf of all members for the work she has done over the past year and a half to ensure all of our health and safety. Barbara's term ends soon, so I'd like to say that I don't believe that any other issue, action, or event since January 2020, or perhaps even throughout her 21-year tenure, has touched and motivated her as this one has. Why? Because this cuts to the core and affects every single PSC member. Barbara knows that this is not only about our terms and conditions of employment, respect and dignity, teaching and learning. It has been about health and safety and life and death. As always, Barbara embraced the fight, whether she was defending a single member or 30,000 members. Barbara, if we were meeting at the PSC or in the rented hall of a hotel right now, we'd be standing in ovation to thank you. Tonight, you'll have to take our word for it. Thousands of our members, thank you for your never-ending vigilance on health and safety issues. Thank you.
Thank you, Andrea. Thank you so much. I wasn't supposed to start off all full of emotion, but thank you. That's beautiful. And thank you all. And it's really been a privilege for me. I mean, who expected this year to be the year it has been? And I feel incredibly lucky to be in a union that has such leadership, such sisterhood in our 4 officers, and you've met them all now tonight. Andrea Vasquez, Sharon Persinger, Nivedita Majumdar. You'll be meeting the incoming officers tonight. We also have such leadership in our health and safety team. And 21 years ago, we started the Health and Safety Watchdogs with the idea that we needed to be always vigilant. Little did we know that the demand and the call would be as great as it has been this year, but this is a collective effort, and I feel incredibly privileged to be able to be in the fight. I have felt that from day one of this pandemic, to be able to keep my job when that has not been a given for everyone, to be able to keep my health, to be able to work from home, and most of all, to be able to play some small role in the fight. I mean, nobody could ask for more than that. So ever since this began, we've started with the slogan, or the not even slogan, but the commitment: save lives, save jobs, save Cuny. And save lives was first for a reason. As Andrea said, this is even a life and death struggle, and I'm proud to be in it with all of you. So it's really lovely to see you. I'm sorry we can't put all the faces on screen. There are now 1.2 thousand people on this Zoom. Yay! It stops counting the individual numbers as it goes above 1,000, I think. So we'll see it as it goes up. So everyone, you're welcome here. And maybe some of the other folks on screen are our staff. Maybe they'll put their cameras on so you can see their beautiful faces, and also our health and safety leaders and some of our chapter leaders. So there they are. Yes, don't be shy. So in a minute, Fran, I'm going to ask you to put up a slide for me. That's great, but not yet. I want to start by, and as Andrea said, a lot of tonight, almost half of tonight, will be question and answer, including hundreds of you pre-submitted questions. But I want to start with some clarity about what we know about Cuny's position, the PSC's position, and how we want to get them aligned. And unfortunately, we have to start with Cuny's position because the Cuny Central Management has been so remarkably bad at putting out clear, unified, comprehensive information. If there's one thing I've heard from members throughout this year, it's been that we need more clarity. We finally got a little clarity last week when we had a letter from the Chancellor. He also put out a video where he explicitly talked about working with the union, or the unions, which is good because there are multiple unions here at Cuny. And that was an important step forward. It wasn't his headline, but we heard it. So let me start with what Cuny has established so far, and then what the PSC's approach has been. As you probably saw, the Chancellor put out a letter last week saying that return to on-campus work in a general way would begin on August 2nd. Although a pattern of continuing telecommuting, remote work, and other remote arrangements would continue. It didn't, and it talked about blended schedules. It didn't say for whom and how. It said that that will be made clear. And that August 2nd applies most immediately, of course, to people who might be teaching in the summer, and also to professional staff, the thousands of professional staff, HEOs, CLTs, other professional staff, library faculty, some counselors, and others who might be expected to start coming back on August 2nd. On faculty, and including full-time faculty and part-time faculty, there was a more vague directive that classes would move onto an in-person mode gradually. And then also before that, an even vaguer directive that something like 60% of classes would suddenly be in person. That turns out not to be as hard and fast a rule as it was initially presented as being, and some campuses are interpreting that in different ways. You'll hear a little bit more about that as we go on. So what we have finally from Cuny is a date, and our health and safety experts have reminded me that having more than 2 months in advance of that date is important. And what I want to say to members is we are not just starting now on health and safety. We've been working on this all year. We've been preparing all year. We are going to be ready for August 2nd. And that's exactly why we set out our own set of standards. So what we know is that the boss, that's Cuny management, has the legal and contractual responsibility to provide a safe workplace. We often have the role of enforcing that, but we don't have to provide it. It's the boss's legal responsibility. Yes, they have the managerial right to call people back to on-site work, but we are also going to assert the enforcement of their responsibility to have a safe and healthy campus, and also to intervene so those movements back onto work will reflect our needs, your needs as HEOs and CLTs, and that there's room to find a way to do that humanely and above all safely. All through the year, first of all, a lot of this work has happened for a year, more than a year ago, right? Last March, we struggled. The PSC took a very firm stand that work had to move off campus as soon as we saw that New York was becoming an epicenter. PSC succeeded in moving us off campus. First, Cuny was willing to move the teaching faculty, and then we struggled very hard and made sure that professional staff had the same concern, were treated with the same concern for their safety as faculty. We were successful in that. We have fought battles on campus after campus, notably at the Hunter College campus schools, which are the only K through 12 schools represented by the PSC. But on campus after campus, a lot of you listening, have fought those individual battles. Some of you have been working on campus throughout this pandemic, and some of you have been called in sporadically. So this is not just a brand new opening, it's a broader opening that Cuny is about to do. But seeing that Cuny management had not articulated a clear set of safety standards for every campus, that's a comprehensive set of standards. The PSC decided we needed to develop our own. And Cuny managers will say, oh, you can't do the same thing on every campus is different. That's true, but you can have a set of standards that ensures to the best possible level the safety of everyone. So the PSC over the last few months, with the brilliant help of the coordinators of the health and safety watchdogs, and you see them on screen, two of our 3 coordinators are here, Joan Greenbaum, Jean Grassman. Jackie Elliott is not here. Sad family emergency called her away. But we thank them so much. They've been working for months to develop our articulation of what must be done to keep us safe. So I'm going to ask Fran if you just put up the one slide that gives an overview of our standards, and we'll take a look at those. And as Fran Clark, our wonderful communications director, is putting those up. We can see, yes, okay. Hope everyone can see that. The PSC, and you'll hear more about these standards later tonight, but the PSC put together our own set of standards to maintain safety. You'll see they involve meaningful participation in reopening plans, maximizing vaccination, minimizing introduction of infection on campus, minimizing transmission of COVID-19 on campus, good ventilation or sufficient for the pandemic, accommodations, very important for remote work, the right to inspect, to do walkthroughs, special standards for labs and studios because of the nature of the hazards, potential hazards there. Critical issue, number 9, workload. Workload is a safety issue. And 10 is access to comprehensive plans. If you can take that down, Fran, because we'll see it again when Jean talks about it later. Great, thank you. Here's our approach in sum. The PSC's approach to keep us safe is that we are not standing against reopening. A lot of us got into this work because we love that one-on-one contact and that collective contact. We have trained and really mastered our work in the setting of in-person work. We are not standing against reopening in principle, but what we are standing for is the principle that everyone who returns to an on-site work location must do so safely. Chief in that process is to be able to do walkthroughs of our workplaces. If you are called back to work in a certain building on a certain campus, the NAC building at City College, for instance, you have to be able to do a walkthrough to see if it's safe. Also, a primary issue for us is taking measures to prohibit the entrance of infectious or even asymptomatic but infectious people onto campus. We have not called for mandatory vaccination, and we have called for the same standard for students, faculty, staff, visitors, and contractors. So our approach is to minimize the chance that COVID-19 gets on campus. But that's not enough. Once on campus, we have to take measures to minimize transmission, even if some COVID-19 has entered onto campus. Further, we have demanded clear, swift responses on accommodations for remote work for people who genuinely are at risk and cannot medically be vaccinated. We think there's a couple of special categories there, and they must be attended to. And then as far as the workplace itself, ventilation should govern. It shouldn't be, let's decide which buildings we use and then figure out how we ventilate them. It should be, let's figure out which rooms in which buildings, which bathrooms, which hallways, which elevators can be ventilated up to the standard, and then we decide to use them. So ventilation should come first. And that's a sort of nutshell of what we have called for. Ideally, management and labor would embrace the same standards. And I'm not in a fairyland. I've been through this for this whole year, but I think there is some possibility that we are working more closely together and that a lot of our standards may converge. That doesn't mean that it wipes out the history or everything you are going through on campus and all the struggles you're going through on campus, but we are trying to work to get management to be aligned with our standards. And we've made some progress. We've made some progress. In the last week, we got an agreement with management to allow walkthroughs of buildings as they are identified to be used in the summer and fall. That's something we had struggled over. That's something we had sat in front of a building and nearly came to a strike at the Hunter campus schools over. But management has agreed that as a building is identified and as the HVAC, the ventilation system, is up and running, we can negotiate protocols for walkthroughs. We're prepared to do that. We've always done that, and do walkthroughs to see if the building meets the standard. Best of all, you can all be trained to do those walkthroughs. We do not have to wait for Superman or an expert. We can all be trained. And that's part of what you're going to hear about tonight, how to get trained. So we reached agreement with management on that. They've also agreed to have a PSC designees on every college reopening committee. And we need to enforce that and get ourselves there in full decision-making roles. I think we have come very close together on the provision that there should be a prohibition on entering campus if you haven't been vaccinated or you haven't got a negative COVID test. If you are somebody who is called back to campus and you have, for some reason, decided not to get the vaccination, you may still come back, but you will have to continue to show updated COVID tests to protect the public health. This is a public crisis, and we are putting first public health. We've come together on a couple of other places. The last one I'll mention is accommodations. We've been working very hard with Cuny to get some kind of comprehensive approach on accommodations so that we don't have a few campuses that are moving reasonably and well on accommodations and others that are saying we won't do anything. There has to be a general directive. And so we're going to hear a little bit more tonight about what we do, because the big question is, okay, that's our standards. We may be coming closer, but we're not aligned yet. So you're going to hear a little bit more about what we do, how we build the power, and we have to recognize that Cuny's history on health and safety, recent and farther back, is not good. We have had to struggle. We have had bathrooms that had no water even before the pandemic. I'm sure there's every single person on this call could cite one health and safety problem in their workplace. That's got to stop. So the history is not promising, but I'm somewhat optimistic about the future because the emergency has summoned us all to recognize how important safety is. And I'll just, before I turn it over to the next person, I'll just say that I think there's a special recognition at Cuny because we were the first epicenter of this virus in this country. Cuny still has the sad distinction of having lost more members of our community than any other university. And we salute their work and their memory right now. And we can't forget that. We also can't forget that our students have been brutally, I would say, traumatized, and many of us have been traumatized by this experience. The experience of having to transform our work, the fear, the loss, the grief in our own families, the double jobs that we've been doing when our children are home or we're taking care of parents. And our students, I think, have that in an exceptional degree. And this year that has exposed the convergence of racist structures of healthcare and racist economy with the pandemic this year has exposed that and caused suffering for our student community in a really extreme way. So when we put together a fight on health here at Cuny and public health, we're fighting for the whole community. We're fighting so that this resource of the City University, which should be primary in any return for New York, but not a return. New York really needs to be rethought and remade, and a remade Cuny could be at the center of that. To make that happen, we have to demand that our health and our students' health is protected and that they can claim their education. As Adrienne Rich said, claim your education. They can claim their education while being safe and healthy. So that's what we're fighting for our own lives, our health, our families whom we want to protect. We don't want to risk our lives to do our job, and also for the community and the principle that there could be a way of having a public urban university for our student population that is safe and beautiful and strong. So it's a big fight to be in, and I think we have really made some progress. I'm eager to hear how we do more tonight and to listen to your questions. So I'm going to turn it over for a moment, right, to Joan Greenbaum. And Joan's going to talk about how you can become a health and safety expert. Joan.
Thank you, Barbara. Well, maybe not an expert. After 21 years of this, I'm not sure I'm an expert, but a health and safety watchdog, which we started together with David Cuddlechuk, who is an internationally recognized health and safety expert, particularly for workplaces, what's called OSHA, the Occupational Safety and Health Administration, which we're under. So we're all watchdogs in one way or another. We see things. We walk into a campus in the morning, think back, and it's stuffy. Okay. We don't hear the heating and ventilating system. We got eyes, we've got ears. What do? Well, as a watchdog, as anybody, you know what you do. You write to the administration, to the building and grounds. And in this case, you've got extra security. You call or write to your COVID administrator. Every campus has one and is responsible for all of you in the name of the administration. You also have noses, you know, and the eyes, the ears, and the dog noses, the watchdog noses. Mine is a bit stuffed with allergy, maybe yours is too. You can smell something is wrong. Before COVID, maybe it was mice, yeah? So what do? You take action. You don't just sit around. So what we're doing as watchdogs is putting that all together. And we've been doing it for 14 months, the organized watchdogs. And we would like to invite those of you who are not currently part of the watchdogs, and we have over 100 who have been meeting weekly, to sign in. And I think there's something in the chat, I would hope, that would say where you can register to be a watchdog. We would hope you would. Again, no special expertise, your eyes, your nose, your hearing, and your commitment that we are lucky to have a union, and we are lucky to put the strength of all of us behind this. You probably have colleagues on other work sites and as well as other campuses that say, we don't have a union, what can we do? Well, this is what we could do. So I think somebody is going to put the link to sign in. Thank you, Andrea.
Great.
Thank you. Chat.
That's great. And I hope it's there. We'll make sure it goes up a couple times tonight. That's great. Please do sign up if you miss it flying by in the chat. It's also on our website. And I can't express how much our health and safety coordinators, Joan and Jean and Jackie, have done this year. I mean, extraordinary work, and our lives depend on it. And they have offered us this beautiful opportunity to become watchdogs, to be trained, and I urge you all to take it. It's really transformative and builds our power. Tonight has to be about building power, and the best way for us to enforce our safety is to have organized, activated union members everywhere. So that gives me an opportunity to welcome and turn it over to James Davis. And I have the pleasure of introducing yes?
Well, can I say one thing before you introduce James?
Of course.
Since we're doing fabulously on time, we have a whole minute. A lot of people joined after and they're asking in the chat.
Good.
So I just want to remind people that we will be taking questions, especially later in the Q&A, and we'll be answering some of the questions even during the meeting. Please do not use the chat for any questions that you want to get answers from this panel. We received all of your questions that you sent in advance. We'll be addressing them in different ways tonight, so have no fear. And I wonder if we can take a moment before James starts, since we're doing so well with time, to put up a quick poll. We have a few questions we'd like to ask of you. How many we have 1.4 thousand.
1.4 thousand.
I'm so glad I can't see everyone. That's terrifying. But we'd like to put up a poll on the screen. Let's see if that works. We're doing so well so far. We have 3 questions. Maybe we could just squeeze in if it goes very quickly tonight.
Okay, let's see if the poll pops up. Okay.
Thanks, Ann. Okay.
You want to read it, Andrea?
Yes. It's how often have you worked on campus during the current academic year? This is a multiple choice question. Never, a few times, reduced schedule, or your regular schedule. So this is all about your on-campus work time.
Some people are putting their responses in the chat. If you can put them on the poll itself, that's great, because then it automatically counts.
It should appear, everyone should be seeing a box that opened up in Zoom that says poll in progress. We will also have some real-time questions. We will also, I said it earlier, maybe you arrived late. We'll have some members on screen asking their own questions, and we'll be reading some questions that were submitted earlier, and we will also be taking some live questions. Okay, I think we should probably.
Did we get the result of the poll yet? We'll see when.
Okay, someone close the polls.
Great, there it is.
I don't know who could see it.
I can see it.
Oh, you can see it. Okay, so there were 79% of you who responded said never. 18% said they worked on campus a few times. 3% say they worked with a reduced schedule, and only 1% said they worked on their regular schedule at campus. So thank you very much, everyone, for filling out that poll.
That's really it's really interesting. And there will be others to come. That's not scientific, but useful.
Yeah, it gives us
And
a
also,
sense.
I wanted to thank the people who are introducing themselves and saying where they're from in the chat. That's fantastic. It's wonderful. And even if you couldn't do the poll, we'll see the results, and there might be other ways we can do them in the future. So the question I ended with, I think the challenge for us is recognizing that we have, I think, a really strong set of safety standards, and there's actually more detail behind each one that you'll be hearing about as the night goes on. And we have, I think, a possibility of working cooperatively with Cuny management because they recognize the urgency of this moment. But we also know, everybody who's walked on any Cuny campus knows that the challenge of health and safety, even in the best of times at Cuny, is tremendous. Will they do better because it's the worst of times in terms of health, or almost? We hope so. But we have to be ready to be organized and have the power to enforce our standards and fight back if that's what we need to do. So that's a perfect moment for our incoming PSC president to talk to us. And I'm really delighted that I can introduce James Davis, who is newly elected as PSC president. I'm really thrilled to be able to introduce my successor. It's wonderful, and it's a great moment for me, and it's a great moment for the union, because creating space for new leadership is exactly what we should do. And it's the principle that the watchdogs are founded on. It's what will keep us safe and keep us strong. So I thank the officers, my sister officers, Andrea and Sharon and Nivedita. I could not have gotten through a day without you, and I still have a week left, and I'm going to work every single day in that week and beyond. But I'm really thrilled that we get to hear from James Davis. So James, over to you.
Thanks, Barbara, and thanks everyone who came out here tonight. A lot of questions that folks have in a really difficult time. So appreciate you being here. I just want to also thank Barbara, Nivedita, and Sharon for their service and dedication. Those of you who have worked at all with Barbara, it's sort of like 20 years. Barbara ran a marathon, and then the last 1 year she spent sprinting, and we're really appreciative and grateful, Barbara, for that. Before I talk about what it will take to get us aligned with Cuny at this point, I did just want to ask if my fellow officers could just introduce themselves briefly. I think you all know and have heard from Andrea Vasquez, who we have the good fortune of continuing to serve with as first vice president. Thanks, Andrea. And Penny Lewis, could you introduce yourself first, please? Thank you.
Sure. Hi, everybody. It's really fantastic everybody's here. My name's Penny Lewis. I am coming in as secretary. I've been the vice president for senior colleges for the past 3 years, and excited to get this role.
Thanks, Penny. Felicia Wharton, our incoming treasurer.
Good evening, everyone. As James says, my name is Felicia Wharton. I'm coming in as the treasurer. I am a faculty member at the Brooklyn Educational Opportunity Center, where I'm a math teacher. So welcome, everyone.
Thank you, Felicia and Penny. So I want to briefly touch on this question of what can be done to align Cuny with our health and safety standards. And we're going to have an opportunity as the program continues to dilate a bit further on these points. So I'm going to be very brief for now and make sure we get to everyone's questions. I think it is important to remember two things. One, that we have managed in recent weeks to align Cuny, to bring them into alignment over some really important matters that Barbara touched on. They've moved on the question of keeping infected people off of campus. They've moved on the question of walkthroughs, pre-occupancy walkthroughs. They've moved on the question of including representatives from the PSC, designated from the PSC on reopening committees. So that's all promising. It's not everything, but it's important movement. I also want to highlight the fact that the past year, as difficult as it's been, has also compelled the union to do things differently. And it's brought members into motion in so many different important creative ways. And it's also brought new structures into the union that are really important currently and moving forward. So we've had health and safety watchdogs for a very long time now, but their role within the union is vitally important, and that has increased in the past year. And it's also developed into rank and file members joining and being trained by the health and safety watchdogs and constituting a really powerful cadre of folks who are trained in NICOSH, able to deploy to different campuses and work closely with campus leaders and rank and file members on health and safety on their campuses. The other structure that I think it's important to remember that we've developed are these reopening committees. And like I said before, we have been, you'll hear later examples of ways that our members have been able to make interventions through their local reopening committees. We also, last November, the Delegate Assembly passed a resolution on strike readiness. And every campus has, in one form or another, a strike readiness committee. Sometimes it's called a one-on-one organizing committee or an action committee. And those have facilitated some really important conversations, phone banking largely, around the stakes of the moment that we're in. And then I guess the last thing I'll say about our existing structures is that we are engaged in impact bargaining. So, because of the effects of the pandemic, we are legally, we have a legal right to engage the university in impact bargaining, and we haggle over what should be the scope of that bargaining, but we continue to engage with them in impact bargaining. But, what else can we do? Well, one thing is that when it comes to this question of return, we really need a strategy for handling problem areas on the campuses and a clear way of communicating locally. So a series of tactics that contribute to a clear strategy would be working with the leadership and the members at the chapter level just to understand what the problem is, being able to communicate between the chapter leadership and the leadership of the PSC with the Cuny administration and with your local administration. So every local campus has a COVID contact person. Every campus has a reopening committee. That communication is a really critical first step. That may not resolve everything. And if it doesn't, we need to be able, if it's not resolved in a timely way, to move to escalate. And, we have been successful in escalating and being creative in a number of different ways in this union in the past year. I'll talk more about escalation and tactics, but another piece of the communication is that we need to be able to notify if there are problem situations that arise, to notify everyone on the campus of what those are, so that they too can be enlisted in any pressure that we need to bring to bear on the local administration. So we can have pressure campaigns from members of the chapter. We can have pressure campaigns from the PSC Central in order to try to resolve these problems. We can certainly do traditional things like petition and letter writing and phone calling. We can, enlist elected officials. We can notify the press. We can involve our coalition partners in the Cuny Rising Alliance and other unions where that is needed. We can also be creative and militant if that becomes necessary in terms of escalating around sit-ins or demonstrations or even direct actions. There's also always the question of strike readiness. And I know anytime that there's a question that's of such high stakes, like the health and safety of our members, we have to take seriously the idea that if a workplace is really unsafe, people should not be compelled to report there. So if you're interested and you're taking seriously the strike readiness question, I would really encourage you to join the committee that's at your chapter level. There's also one-on-one phone banking that's been run every week. I want to give a lot of credit here to Sharon Utakis from Bronx Community College and David Gerwin from Queens College, and everybody who's been working on strike readiness committees on the campuses to do that phone banking. It's a lot of work, but it's very rewarding. It involves education and agitation, and that education goes in multiple directions. We learn from our members, and our members learn about what's going on in the union. So I want to stop there for now in terms of what we can do to bring CUNY in alignment with our standards. Those are many things we can come back to as the evening progresses. Thanks.
Great, thank you, James. And I think that was great to have the whole range of ways that we can escalate. We are prepared to escalate, and we're also prepared to work in small ways at the same time. We may have to do both. And I want to say to everyone, I hope you can see by the continuity here among the officers that on every issue, but on this, especially this key issue of people's safety, there will be no interim period. There will be no loss of momentum. I think there will be a gain of momentum as new officers come on. So we will continue working as strongly as we can together. And we've been working together with the incoming officers for a couple of months so that we can be strong for you, for members throughout, without a day of lost time, because there's no time to lose. So now it's great seeing some other faces come on the screen. That's wonderful. Now we have a chance to hear from your questions. I think Andrea Vasquez is going to monitor questions, and there were hundreds of questions sent in advance. We're going to get to some of those. So over to you, Andrea.
Great, thanks. Okay, so we have 4 members who are going to ask their own question on screen, and then you see the panel. We will take turns answering the questions, and we'll all try to be brief because we want to hear and answer as many questions as possible. So Lisa Evelyn, a HEO assistant from Medgar Evers. Can we unmute her and hear her question?
Good afternoon, everyone. Lisa Evelyn, she, her. So my question is, what should I do if my workspace is not configured to meet COVID-19 safety guidelines during the time I'm requested to report back to work?
Great question.
Thank you.
Thanks so much, Lisa Evelyn. Thank you. Jean or Joan, you want to start, and then I might pick up on the contractual stuff.
Sure, I'm happy to start, and you can fill in. Anyhow, that is a really great question, because I think so many of us are, thinking about the same thing. What if it's not ready? One of the going back to the standards, and I think this is why the standards are so important, because they address this in a lot of different ways. One is, the current effort, which we are planning on doing walkthroughs. And earlier when Barbara said, we're all experts in health and safety, and Joan said, well, maybe not entirely. And we are all experts on the conditions in our own workplace. So part of what we want, this is why the walkthroughs are going to be so important. And we're endeavoring to make sure that each campus examines all their spaces. That alone is not, when you're talking about your workplace being configured, there's sort of the physical configuration as to whether, you've got a lot of people in a small space, and that can be a concern. And again, that's something that we're pushing to have addressed through the standards. Another sort of piece of the configuration, we don't think of it so much as a physical, but it's there, is the ventilation. And that's something that I'm really impressed with what the watchdogs have done, because people have learned a lot about ventilation. And in the upcoming trainings, what we're going to be doing is getting the details on that.
Great.
So
thank you.
I just want to add on the contractual issue, and this comes up all the time. I appreciate your asking. Let's say we've done a walkthrough, we've already been through there, we thought it was okay, and you're called back to work, and for some reason you instantly feel that your space is not safe. Under the contract, you have rights. The first thing you should do is notify your supervisor. If you feel it's not safe, notify your supervisor and ask to work in a different space. Ask to work there and then report on what's wrong with your space. I would say also, if you're not getting what you need from your supervisor, call college HR. It is the college's responsibility to provide a safe space. And if you're still not getting anywhere, call the union, call your chapter chair, and take action there. But remember that, you know, if you are feeling that your space is not safe, you should ask to work somewhere else and identify what needs to be changed in your view. And then that's where we come back to what James said about putting pressure on to get it fixed.
Great. Thanks. Let's hear the next question is from Rachel Reese. I'm not sure I said your name right. I apologize. Who's a non-teaching adjunct from Baruch.
Hi, my name is Rachel Riss, and I'm actually the Assistant Director of the Writing Center at Baruch College, but speaking for some of the NTAs that I work with. Our Writing Center is staffed by 22 non-teaching adjuncts or NTAs who are of course members of the PSC. In the reopening guidance that we've reviewed, we've really seen no mention so far of NTAs. We know that full-time faculty and teaching adjuncts have some degree of flexibility in choosing modality. Full-time staff also has some potential flexibility in terms of remote work agreements. So my question is this, will NTAs also be covered by the remote work agreement? That is, can supervisors approve remote work for NTAs, or is this flexibility reserved only for faculty and full-time staff? Over half of our NTAs rely on this position for health insurance, so clarity around this would be greatly appreciated.
Great, great. Yeah, we worked on that remote work agreement for a long time with Cuny, and it finally got released. And it does not say it's only for HEOs or only for librarians. So it's great that you brought that up. It can definitely be used by anyone with their, making an arrangement with their supervisor. If you're working remotely, that form should be used. And, employees should rely on that. I think that's a good question. We have to spend a lot of time on that. Right.
I think Joan wanted to add in.
Okay,
Joan?
sorry.
Yes, not only because writing centers are near and dear to my heart, but to return to what Jean Grassman had said, if you're in the writing center, it's ventilation that's the key. And it's ventilation that we have to constantly report to building and grounds and the administration, depending on your campus. But yeah, I hope there'll be people there and I hope they'll be safe.
And for those who don't know, we made an agreement in impact bargaining with Cuny about the remote work form, which is an agreement between each supervisor and each employee. That is an agreement on where you spend your time, basically, what you're doing remotely and all kinds of other things associated with working from home. So the next question is from Virginia Thompson, who is an assistant professor at York.
Hi, how are you? So my question is, will we be required to teach without masks on or off? At York College, they are developing high flex classrooms, whereas some students will be learning from inside the classroom and then online. And I gather that if I have my mask on, maybe those online might not be able to really hear me. And so I don't know what can you say about that?
Okay.
Question. Jean, do you want to say something about the mask mandate? And maybe Penny wants to say something about high flex classes.
Yeah, and I'm sorry to hear high flex classes are a challenge. And so regarding the mask, so this is something that's changing day by day, and we've been hearing that CDC is relaxing mask rules, and that is going to affect what's going on in Cuny to some degree. I think, and again, going back to the standards, we're not going to be able to reduce risk to zero, but if you're in a room that has good ventilation and it's not overcrowded, and you're on a campus and campuses are checking to make sure that people who are COVID positive or are not, or that people entering campus are either vaccinated or COVID negative, that covers a lot of ground. So you've got a lot of redundancy in risk reduction. So I would say it's probably okay to not wear the mask for the teaching. I think all of us are, we're kind of learning as we go along in terms of what the risk is. And so, for the most part, it would be nice if, students wear the mask, but if you have one person with good ventilation, good spacing, good monitoring of the campus, it should be okay. But it depends on, and this is why we want to make sure, that, to call CUNY to task to provide that information.
I'll just quickly say on the high flex question, which wasn't really your question, but it's a really important one. A lot of campuses are rolling out, kind of pilot programs we've heard about on high flex, and the union would really like to hear from all of you about what is happening. So Virginia, it'd be great for you to give us some details about that, because we're really concerned that that's a major workload increase, and that's standard number 9 and the one that we shared with you. And we think that people should be compensated with time or money if they're being asked to develop these high flex courses, because they really constitute an absolute increase in workload and require a lot more support. And so we just want to get reports from all of you about what changes in modality are happening and how much that's affecting your workload, because we should be negotiating about that and pushing back on that on our campuses and centrally.
Great. Okay, so now we have a question from Suzanne Barlow Glatfeli, a non-teaching adjunct from CUNY Central. And I know I said that name wrong.
Susie needs to be unmuted, it looks like. So while we're waiting for that.
Susie Barlow. Okay, there she is. Okay, great.
Hi, Susie Barlow. So I'm at the advancement office at the Graduate Center. I do prospect research. I have found that the office is very flexible for letting people work from home if that's what they need for timing and everything else. I'm worried because we are in a large room and we have waist-high cubicles. So everything is open. We have one door for entrance exit both ways. We have no windows whatsoever, and our ventilation is so bad that most of us use desk fans. I'm wondering, what are the protocols going to be? And we share the space, so I might be the third person at that desk. What are the protocols for the non-teaching adjunct bullpen accommodations?
I'll just start, and then maybe some of the health and safety folks can join in. The standards have to be the same for everyone. Absolutely the same. I mean, that's a bedrock principle of our standards, that there should be no difference between the kind of, I mean, there are differences in our jobs, right? And then some people are in the classroom, some are not. But in terms of the need for protection, that goes right across every title, absolutely the same. And that's been the theme for us from the start. So part of what we are pushing on from CUNY in our standards is proper disinfecting of spaces. And I think we've all learned that surface transmission is not the biggest issue anymore. Ventilation is, and masking when it's needed. But we have called for proper cleaning and ventilation. We've also called for an adequate number of staff to do that cleaning. It's not fair to undercut the numbers of staff and the other unions at CUNY and then say they have to do the same level of cleaning. We've also called for a training for them and protection for them doing the cleaning and things to keep them safe, including use of certain chemicals or denying use of those chemicals. So the standards are the same. And the need for ventilation is absolutely the same, whether you're a non-teaching adjunct, and Rachel asked about this too, or a teaching adjunct, or whoever you are, CLT, full-time faculty. And one thing I do want to say is that it's interesting that these questions come up because CUNY management relies so much on contingent workers that they somehow have managed to send around the idea that there could be a different set of standards for contingent workers. We're all people, we're all in our bodies, we have to have the same safety standards. So while Cuny has relied on super contingency, and as you know, Rachel was saying, and I know that there are non-teaching adjuncts who were laid off, that's not acceptable to us, and it's not acceptable to us that there be any different standards. So if that response needs to be collective in your workplace, that's exactly what James was talking about. Our biggest power is to be collective in the workplace and to come together, as you know, as you were sort of hinting at, Susie. So thank you.
Okay, great. We have a bunch of other questions. I think we have one more person who we are bringing on screen. Is that right, Sim? Not really.
Sean is here on screen.
Sean. Oh, I thought it was Sam. Okay, Sean, can you introduce yourself? Because I don't know who you are, but go ahead, introduce yourself and ask your question, please. That's okay.
Hi, everybody. Thanks,
Hi.
Andrea. I'm Sean Garrity. I'm an assistant professor of English at Hostos. My question is one that I'm sure is on a lot of people's minds tonight. So we know that the governor obviously has mandated that students who want to attend classes in person at Cuny or SUNY have to be vaccinated. But I'm wondering what about faculty and staff, and what the union's position on this is or will be, and how they intend to broach the subject with Cuny.
Let me start on that. And just to clarify, yes, and that the governor suddenly came out with that, not a lot of warning, I think, and there, you know, for whatever reasons. And the clarification from what I've seen in the governor's directive is assuming that the COVID vaccine becomes authorized beyond emergency use. That's an important difference. And that's in the governor's strictures. But two things I want to say. One is that in our emphasis in our standards, that there be a very careful barrier so that people who have not tested negative or have not been vaccinated cannot even get on campus. In some ways, that is an even better protection, because a lot of the mandates that call for vaccination of students call for that vaccination just to register for an in-person course. It doesn't say whether the student has to be vaccinated to come on campus to use the library or meet with a counselor or do something else. So really the sort of the barrier that we're trying to erect around the campus is a critical piece. And then second, we did talk long and hard in the union leadership about taking the position that vaccination should be mandatory for us and for students and other staff. We wanted to take the same position for students as for ourselves and not mandate something for them that we weren't prepared for ourselves. If it depends on the authorization from the government about the vaccine, it is also possible that we would negotiate with CUNY over protocols they want to put in place. For instance, they do have to negotiate with us if they want to implement testing on campus. They have to negotiate with the union, and we have protocols ready that we want to negotiate. So I think that's where the vaccination issue stands, and it's a key question.
Great. Thank you. Anyone else quickly on that? Okay, so I just wanted to also quickly let people know that it's great you're communicating in the chat. We're not looking at the chat, so please, put your questions in the Q&A in the question, because we're going to hear some more member questions now, but in the next section on Q&A, we will be hearing from you. So only if it's in the Q&A. So thanks so much. And I also want to let people know, if they didn't figure it out already, that auto captions is enabled, so you can get to that. And a lot of ringing going on, but I would like to move on to the next section of questions, which is members who didn't necessarily want to be on camera, but we're going to read those questions or name them, name them. So I asked Felicia to help me with these. So Felicia will read out the question, and then the panel again will be able to address each question. So the first one is from Ahio at Brooklyn College.
Are the accommodations that can be made for those age 65 or older at the discretion of the college?
Are they at the discretion of the college?
Who wants to tackle that? Me? Under the Americans with Disabilities Act, which governs accommodations and which has been updated, and Joan or Jean may want to speak about this, but it's been updated for COVID. Accommodations have to be requested. And there's some strictures on that are, it's not an entirely employee favorable law. And even though it was a huge struggle to get that in the law, the ADA, but the employer still has the right to determine a kind of accommodation that they find that would not be, quote, an undue burden on them. However, the position that we're taking on accommodations in our standards is we're trying to be really precise. And there are two things that we have called for. One is that if medically you cannot be vaccinated or your body won't make the antibodies, which I hear can happen, then in that case, we feel you must be given an accommodation. And I know that the management reserves the right to determine how it's done. I think Dean's putting the link in the chat, but that's one category. And the second is that if you have someone in your household who is both in a high risk category and cannot be medically vaccinated, then we feel in that case, you must also be given an accommodation. We also think there should be accommodations for other things that the CDC calls comorbidities, and age can be a factor in those. And we stress that there should be openness to that, and also an awareness that people with other kinds of disabilities may be further disadvantaged under COVID. Somebody mentioned to me, you can't read lips if somebody's wearing a mask and speaking to you. So there are other things to be attentive to, but we have called for a primary category of these two groups where medical vaccination is not possible and there's real risk, medical risk. And then we have asked management and pressed them to be attentive and to be open to accommodations for people with comorbidities, and over a certain age counts in that group.
Okay, great. The next question is from a CLT at LaGuardia, college lab technician.
Will CLTs be required to stay on campus even when no labs are running? Or can they come in and run the labs and do the rest of their online work? They work online at home, or in order to decrease the chance of spread?
I think you should answer that, Andrea.
Okay. I mean, they should use the remote work form in this case, I think. That's a request to be made. You have a reason. You've been doing your work at home, obviously, that you could in this whole period. So I think, obviously, there's been a lot of concern about CLTs. We've heard from the terrific CLT leaders and Jeanette Batiste, and it's a really important question. But CLTs who are on campus, the most important thing I'll repeat is, of course, that those rooms and those labs need to be inspected, need to be walked through and looked at and make sure they're safe before people are working in those rooms. So that's step one. And then if you feel that you can do a lot of your work out of that space, I think that, as Barbara said earlier, we do have some agreement with Cuny on things, and they seem to want to have some people be working sometime remotely. We don't know exactly how that's going to play out, but if you've been doing that kind of your job at home, there's no reason you couldn't make that request. Anyone else want to say anything about that?
Can I just say that it's worth remembering that we've all accommodated Cuny for the last 14 months. They've told us, you have to do this, you have to work, you have to transfer, you have to find a way. They didn't help us figure out how to do our classes. Basically, they didn't help us out to reimagine and rethink our entire teaching that you've been doing for 25 years, and now you have to rethink it. They didn't help counselors to know how to work from home. We accommodated Cuny over and over and over again for 14 months. And we are asking them to accommodate us now in this move back into on-campus work. And I think they should. And as we keep asserting that collectively, I think we will gain in power to make that point.
Robert, you wanted to say something on this?
Yeah, I did. I'm Robert Farrell. I'm the chapter chair from Lehman College. I wanted to say that many of us who work a 35-hour week are supervisors of one sort or another. Or we may liaise with an administrator, somebody who's in management very closely. I think we need to look very carefully at the PSC's health and safety standards on this topic and enact them ourselves if we're supervisors, and be responsive to the needs of our fellow union members, not our subordinates, that we might look at people in those terms at times. And also those of us who have those relationships with management due to the reporting structures of our offices, work very closely with those folks to educate them about the importance of these standards, because you don't have to have an official accommodation under ADA to be given the flexible work plan. So I just want to say that we have a lot of power as union members in this situation.
Okay, great. Thank you. The next question is from a teaching adjunct at Bronx Community College.
What happens if one of my students contract COVID-19?
Joan, is that a question you might want to take?
Sure. Well, there is a procedure in place now, and it's been for the past year, and it will continue. But we're making it stronger. The first thing is everybody coming into a campus, as Barbara has said, and Jean has said, will be screened through, are you vaccinated? Have you shown the documents? Or have you taken a recent test? And we'll come back to that. So in the event that somebody does have COVID on campus, and that includes contractors, visitors, your grandmother, anybody who's coming onto campus. In the event that somebody was positive, there's a COVID administrator on every campus and an official, an administrator responsible on every work site who must report it and inform anybody who was in contact with that person. So I think those procedures, I want to say, they're pretty good.
Great. I'd like to jump down, Felicia, to number 7, which is from an associate professor at John Jay College.
What leverage do we have to win let me begin again. What leverage do we have to win any health and safety standards that employees call for? Will the PSC use the opportunity to call for a strike authorization vote?
I think we should go to James.
Yeah,
I'm
I can
happy to
respond
answer,
to
but I
that.
think it's important to hear from James.
Sure. So yeah, I appreciate the question. A strike authorization vote is a really important tactic. And as many of you know, we the PSC, held a strike authorization vote, and it helped resolve our last contract that was expired for over 6 years. And again, it's a very reasonable question because, as we saw with the Hunter campus schools, it took organizing a strike authorization vote within that chapter to move the administration to allow an independent inspection of that workplace. So a strike authorization vote is a powerful tactic. And in fact, at the last, so some of you know that strikes are in the public sector are illegal in New York State. Strike authorization votes are not. In the last delegate assembly, a motion was made and referred to the Executive Council about holding a strike authorization vote this summer. So this is a question that the Executive Council is going to be dealing with immediately. And what we'll be doing is trying to assess the strategic value at this stage of using that as a tactic, and also looking at the progress of our strike readiness campaign. I want to circle back briefly to the first part of the question, which is, well, what leverage do we really have? And I think it's important to recall that there are forms of leverage that we have apart from the ability to withhold our labor, and they may, in fact, and have to some extent worked. I mean, one important one to keep in mind is the language of the contract itself, which is that the employer must keep our workplace free. This is Article 39 of our contract, free from recognized hazards that are causing or likely to cause death or serious harm to employees, and that the employer shall comply with the OSHA Act of 1970. It's in it's in the contract. And, having the leverage to enforce that provision comes through some of the elements that I mentioned earlier, especially in including, as Barbara and Penny and others have pointed out, the involvement on the local campus level to apply pressure where that article of the contract is being violated and people are at risk. So having folks being able to do pre-occupancy and post-occupancy walkthroughs and identifying problem areas provides a critical kind of leverage at the local campus level. So, yes to the question, is the Executive Council considering strike authorization tactic? It's something that shouldn't be off the table given CUNY's history of facilities, but there are other levers that we have to exhaust along the way.
Thank you, James. There are two very short questions I think we can squeeze in like the last 2 minutes. And maybe I'll just read them real quickly because I've just chosen them here. This one's from an assistant to HEO at the Graduate Center. If the direct supervisor and the worker agree to an in-person telecommunicating work schedule, can it be denied by anyone else? The agreement is between the supervisor and the employee. If any problems arise around it, I think Barbara mentioned earlier, there are other people and other places you can reach out to, but that's not the process that was laid out. The process that was laid out is between the employee and the supervisor. So that should be the whole process. The second question is from a professor at City Tech who asked, will full-time faculty be forced back to campus? Barbara, could you give us a really quick answer to that one? It's important.
Not a quick answer, but I'll try. Because it's a tough question. I mean, and I think the professor is probably asking about the fact that some people had already planned to teach remotely, and students had even registered for classes in the remote mode, and folks are now being told their class has to be in person. The PSC centrally has pushed back really hard on that. We have not yet got an agreement that classes that were originally planned in one mode have to stay in that mode, but we are working on that and working toward that. We're also working to make sure that there are no further changes in modality. I don't feel it's fair to students because they plan their programs around being remote, and it's not fair to the faculty either. So the employer does have the right to say where a work activity will be conducted, but the PSC takes the position that departments should determine the modality, by which I mean in-person, hybrid, whatever, the modality of courses, that's an academic decision to be made with the faculty member out of the expertise of the department in your field, and not just a pure managerial decision. This is a hard issue and we're fighting on it. So to answer your question, the college management can call for you to move your class into an in-person setting. If you feel you need an accommodation, we spoke to that separately. If you feel your space is not safe, that we also spoke to, or that it's not ventilated, that's a separate issue. And if you feel that the modality is wrong for your class at this point, go to your chair. We are trying to work with department chairs and the chapter chairs to push against the idea that any class can just be instantly, transformed into a whole different mode. So I hope that answers. It's a tough question, and I think an important one.
Thank you. And thank you everyone for submitting your questions. The ones that we addressed here were representative of many others that were submitted. So, and thanks to the panelists for your answers. I think we move on to Joan and Jean now, or Joan? Yes, Joan and Jean. Thank you.
Okay, I'm going to try to share my screen here. So wish me luck.
Good luck.
Okay, can you see this?
Well, a little small.
Yeah. All right,
small.
We talked about that earlier.
Oh, okay.
Okay, and now of course I can't make it bigger. I was able to do this earlier.
Well, people can enlarge it themselves by going up to view options and enlarge it.
Really?
Yep, go up to view options and it says 50%, 100%, 150.
Oh, I
I'm
see.
sorry.
Right. Yeah, that works.
Wait,
Good.
okay.
You
All
can
right.
still talk about it though, Jean.
All right, so what I wanted to do, and you have already seen the 10 standards. And so what I wanted to show you is is essentially the expansion of the standards. So what I'd like to look at now, and Joan will show you another standard on walkthroughs, is sort of what the expansion actually looks like. So the standard here is for ventilation. And, and so we know that, basically the text is, in order for a space to be occupied, it has to comply with authoritative guidelines for the reduction of airborne viruses. So what this is meant to do is to essentially lay out how the standard is achieved. So the middle here is to achieve the standard, this is what Cuny needs to do. And then the column to the right of that is evidence that the standard has been achieved. So we have this for all 10 standards. We're just showing you a couple of samples. And then on the far right are basically the sources for the standards. So it's not merely us, this is, thinking of what we want to say. It's actually based on scientific evidence. So the way this works, so the first and very important is to audit ventilation of all occupied spaces. And basically the evidence that what Cuny needs to do to show compliance with that is specified in the next column, which is, it basically says what we need to know. And this is for each occupied space. It's not for the building. And that's the problem that we're going to run into, is they're going to want to say, Ingersoll Hall, this is what the airflow is. And it needs to be for every space, not just classrooms, but offices, bathrooms, everything. And so it gives a specification as to the number of air changes, the percent of outdoor air, and then the level of filtration. So what you can do here is just go down the list, and this will specify, in order to have adequate ventilation, these things need to be done. So one, besides just sort of the parameters of ventilation, there's timing. It has to be, and this is a tricky thing for us watchdogs, is what is satisfactory in the fall may not be satisfactory in the spring as the system changes. That the system has to be configured, and this is important because essentially, we're dealing with ventilation systems that have not been kept up, and that up to the pandemic were really configured for energy conservation. So that has to be changed. And there's other specifications. I think you get the idea, of how, that the systems need to be turned on before and after the working day, that we want to purge the systems between uses, the spaces between classes, that the occupancy should be based on the ventilation. Distancing, when you get to something such as ventilation, is kind of deceptive in a lot of ways, because the spread is really via aerosols. So if you have poor ventilation, distancing is not going to save you. It's really the ventilation that determines how the virus moves around. And so there's also, a bit about instances where there's not HVAC systems, where, sort of the smaller units, the mobile, the supplementary units, so there's requirements for how they work, their technology.
as well as having enough of them to be adequate for the size. And that's tricky because you can't just put one unit in a huge classroom. So, and other aspects of this is there is, you know, just refers you to the other standard. Laboratories and studios need augmented ventilation. So we've got a standard on that. And then, you know, there's an appendix. So you get the idea. But, you know, this is really one of the key aspects of controlling our exposure and reducing our risk. And this is, you know, one of the reasons we emphasize this, besides it being key, is also this is the means to help prevent future pandemics. So it's not just, you know, these improvements that we're really pushing for, and I think Cuny is really hearing it, are not just for the fall. This will help us as we move forward through time. And there are things that we really do need, and we've needed for a long time. So it is an opportunity in a lot of ways, despite the, you know, the circumstances. So I'll leave off there and let Joan tell you about walkthroughs.
I think we'll also have questions about ventilation, I'm sure. We often do. Jean, could I ask you to put up the ventilation?
Sure.
Standards. And when we say standards, as Jean pointed out, there's lots of scientific evidence to back them up. And they were put together by over 100 members who have been acting as watchdogs. And you are all fabulous people. Many, many of you are on this call. And you started out as just what you ever were, like I was, as a non-expert. And then you learned your own individual area. So this is cumulative knowledge plus citations. And it's a really, really great event, I think. I think it's exciting to see it out here. And of course, we'll have copies for everybody.
Great.
So what's an inspection? I'm looking, can it be made larger? And we like to call them walkthroughs. And who could do it? Everybody can do it. At least we believe so. I've just lost my list. I got it. Okay. There we go. So as Barbara said, in the beginning, the Cuny administration has agreed to inspections. Yay. In fact, we do them anyway, don't we? Because we walk into a workplace in the morning and we say, something's wrong here. Now, the collective ideal is that you don't say, this feels unsafe for me. You and the other workers with you and the union with you say, well, no, look, we've got these guidelines, we've got these standards. Let's say we're walking around the library and we're doing, and the first bullet in under to achieve the standard, Cuny should permit pre-occupancy walkthroughs. Okay, so you work in a library, you're every title that works in a library, and you have a right to walk through that library before it opens, but ideally under a condition where the ventilation system is running at the level that it should be. Now, there's a whole lot of things that you are going to say, you know, me and the other people who work in the library, we don't know the technical thing here. So like in anything else we do, we take notes, we write it down. If management is doing the walkthrough with us, we ask questions, but it's very important, please, 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 listen to an old woman who has done this for a long time, that we write this down and ask it in writing of management, because you know, so often you ask a question orally and they say, it's fine, there's no problem here. But if you ask it in writing, you are asking them to put the answer in writing. And the answer in writing is our guarantee that it is actually fine. And if you or no one else along on your walkthrough don't quite know if it's fine, you give it to one of the watchdogs on your campus, or you refer it to Cuny, I'm sorry, to the PSC watchdogs. Where did that come from? Sorry. And we get answers and we check answers. But this is all of us acting together. An inspection is not, I walked into my workplace and it seems okay. It's all of us putting our knowledge together and saying, in addition to what I'm seeing, I want these things written. And they should go to, ideally, they should go to the executive committee of the union on your campus first, along with the watchdogs. And if you're not on a campus, and a frequently asked question is, I'm in a rental building, they should be asked of CUNY management because they are responsible for their contract with the rented building. I've covered most of all of the things on this page, but you'll get a chance to really look at them and think about them. And I'm sure that there will be questions. You do not have to be an expert. You just have to live in your workplace.
That's great.
Well, work in your workplace. Thank you.
Thank you, Joan. Thanks for all the training, hundreds of people trained in this. And if we take that screen down, that's great. We can keep going. And I think we can put in the chat again, if you would, where people can sign up to be trained to do the walkthroughs. I would love to have 30,000 PSC members signed up to be trained to do the walkthroughs. I really would. Think of the power we would have on campus if we told management that every single PSC member had been trained in doing a walkthrough. That's terrifying. And that's a power that we should have. And I think one thing that Joan said that was so important was that we gain collective power when we do walkthroughs together as the union. That's collective power. That's not just you looking around. We had the question earlier, what do I do if my own work site feels unsafe? Our power is the collective power to name what's wrong, demand answers in writing, follow up on those answers, make sure things are fixed. That's our collective power. And very important what we said earlier in the meeting, we did get agreement from CUNY that we will be able to do walkthroughs, permitted, negotiate the walkthroughs, building by building, as certain buildings are named for occupancy. So we can use that collective power building by building before you are told or asked to go in. I think that's critical. So speaking of building our power, we're going to take a couple of minutes before we go back to some more questions, just 5 minutes or so, to hear from a couple of folks who have worked successfully on their campuses in their reopening committees to build that power. And I think we have two people from the Brooklyn College Reopening Committee whom James will introduce, and then a word from Robert Farrell, who's been working on it at Lehman.
Thanks. I just want to introduce my colleagues at Brooklyn College, Kelly Spivey, who's a CLT in the film department, and Larry Boskett, who's a HEO, works in the admissions office. They've been brave and diligent participants in the reopening committee and have made some really great contributions and interventions they wanted to speak to us about.
Go first, Larry.
Okay, Kelly, you want to go first?
Sure. Can you hear me okay?
Not too well.
Well,
A little faint.
How about that? Is that any better?
Maybe Lawrence, maybe you could start. And
yeah,
then
I'll start. That's fine.
Right. Kelly can get hers going.
Okay. Hi. Actually, I'm glad I have the opportunity to speak for a few minutes. James asked me to join the committee late in 2020 when the committee had already been established. So it was great that I was there, but it was also great that Kelly was there also. And I think initially we did have some trepidations that will we have any real say? Or are we there just to be face or just a political look? But one of the things we have discovered is that we do have a voice. And what I see myself and what Kelly also sees herself as being a bridge between my fellow staff members and management. I hear the concerns from my fellow HEOs, my fellow CLTs. They let me know anytime there's news that's coming out, whether it's in the media, from Cuomo, from letters that we get from the chancellor. I had a meeting with our HEO staff yesterday, and they all expressed their concerns, something that you're seeing in the chat room today, and we're able to express that to them. One of the things that I think our presidents have done is force transparency. Ever since we joined the committee, our president has been very diligent in sending out weekly newsletters, letting you know our progress, letting you know what's happening. She announced yesterday that we're going to have a big town hall addressing staff concerns in a few weeks. I think that's a tremendous thing. And it also puts their feet to the fire to listen to the concerns that we have, to listen to the things that we have at this point. So I think transparency has become a longer in communications. When you're getting conflicting communications from so many different sources, you at least want to have one source that you can look at. And I think our presence puts that feet to the fire. Kelly, did you want to add something at this point? Or?
Yeah, hopefully you can hear me okay now.
Great.
The headphones. Okay, yeah, I'm probably going to repeat a little bit of what Larry said. I got onto the reentry review board because I was actually reaching out to James, our faculty chapter chair, about student concerns that I had around students working in groups early on during COVID, in situations where they weren't necessarily knowing how to be COVID safe, not being supervised, working off campus. And so even though that's not really, at that time, wasn't really like a union, an issue that the union could get behind, he managed to help facilitate our presence on the review board, which I think we're supposed to be, right? I think there's supposed to be faculty, union members, and students on these. And so now I'm happy to say there's Larry, me, there's faculty, and now we have 2 students as well on that review board. It's been so interesting. The first thing I want to say is for any campuses that don't have staff or CLTs or HEOs on the review board, if you can get on it, it's super interesting and fascinating. We are, as Larry said, sort of a go-between. I take it very seriously to represent the other CLTs, and now HEOs and CLTs, thanks to Janet, are getting organized together on our campus. And so I really listen to people across Brooklyn College and even Fierstein Graduate School of Cinema. They know that we're on this board and they reach out to us. They feel safe reaching out to us if they have concerns around the safety in their, because they've been going to work this whole time, many CLTs this whole year. And so luckily at Brooklyn College, the administration also seems to be grateful. They, I think it was Robert who said, we really do have a lot of power. We have a lot of power. That's what I've learned. We have a lot of power. The admins don't want the union members to be upset and come to their house and knock on their door. And, but they also genuinely want us to be safe. I think what Barbara was saying, the optimism that you have, I feel that too. They don't want COVID to run rampant on the campuses either. One of the interesting things I've learned, and I know my time's probably up, but they're facing things, they're facing things too, right? They are facing financial struggles with making things safe on campus. They are double duty, triple duty, doing way too much, which I think, even though they aren't union members, it's something as a union we need to be perhaps working on somehow. I don't know. All right. Thanks, everybody.
Great. Thank you, Kelly. That was great and really important message from both of you that we do have power. And that's what tonight is about, using that. And part of that is our self-education. We'll hear from Robert Farrell, our chapter chair and a librarian at Lehman College, who's also been working locally on reopening. And just a minute or two.
Yeah, thank you, Barbara, and thanks to everyone who put this event together and to our tireless watchdogs who are training so many people on a day-to-day basis. Our situation is very similar to what we just heard from Brooklyn, I think. We initially had 4 union reps appointed to the reopening committees. One was a faculty reopening committee focused on the classroom. The other was workspace for office workers. We've advocated to get more and have developed relationships with other people who are on those committees. And the importance of that work has really been the information that they get within the committee that they then bring to our chapter executive committee for review. And we're then able to think about ways to push management further than they're currently thinking or currently going within our labor management meetings or within individual conversations with our labor designee. One area is on ventilation. The reopening committees really were only focusing on the system-wide specs for the HVAC operations of the campus and not really looking at the individual rooms. Going back to management and labor management, we've been emphasizing that, and then our reopening committee representatives are reinforcing that within the meetings. And so we're seeing movement, and we are working towards scheduling pre-occupancy walkthroughs, which were in motion before it sounds like the union got this more formal agreement to allow them, which I'm incredibly happy about because a lot of the campuses were resistant to it. But we were able to push through that resistance earlier on and are in the process of scheduling those walkthroughs. Our reopening committees also did not have student involvement, and in our labor management discussions, we were able to push on that and got 2 students appointed to the reopening committees. But in terms of health and safety, I think the single most important thing we've done this semester was to get an individual HEO out of a dangerous work situation earlier in the semester before the vaccines were readily available. This particular HEO was being assigned to do duties that were far outside the scope of their responsibilities. And we only found out about it after the HEO got COVID. The HEO had gotten COVID the previous semester working under the same conditions and had wanted to be a team player. The whole mindset of, I think, most of us throughout this pandemic is what can we do to serve students better? What can we do to meet the challenge of this kind of remote work situation? And this particular HEO was going above and beyond on a day-to-day basis and got to the point where they realized management did not have their back. After the HEO got COVID, they were continually being asked to go back into the situation to the point where they realized it was unsustainable, and they finally contacted us. If I can say one thing that's going to be essential going forward, and this is something that my colleague Haruko Yamauchi in the library at Ostos has been talking about, is that the walkthroughs are going to be important, and the work we're doing on our reopening committees are important for day 1. But what happens in day 2, 3, 4, and so on? We are going to have to be individually vigilant as workers and immediately report situations that appear dangerous, even if we aren't able to say exactly why, so that our chapter executive committees or our local health and safety watchdogs can intervene and try to get the situation resolved. It's going to take all of us getting trained, and so we have some people who are getting trained to do walkthroughs, but we're going to need everybody to do it. So I'm super excited that over 1,400 people were on this call, and more than 1,000 still are. It's fantastic, but we've got a lot of work to do.
That's great, Robert. Thank you. Such an important story to hear, and there are others, and thank you for the intervention. I think Penny will wrap us up, and then we're going to go to some questions, wrap up this section about local work, but we're turning next to more of your questions.
I mean, I think that what we just heard really emphasizes all the main points. I mean, one, that we have to be active and vigilant on our campuses, and every single one of us should be asking the question of how, can I do this work now? Like who are the people I can be speaking to? What committees, like the reopening committee, can I be pushing into? What one-on-one work can I be doing in terms of creating the networks of communication on our campuses so that we can hear from our coworkers who might be getting, pushed into unsafe conditions or are scared about it. So making sure that our campuses are deeply organized this summer so that as we go back and join the walkthroughs and get trained for the walkthroughs, but so that as we go back, we can exercise that that power and keep that communication going. So I just would stress that it does take every single one of us, that a lot of us have a lot of power here, and we can build on that power over the coming weeks.
That's great. Thank you. Thank you, Penny, and everyone who's carrying on that fight. It makes me angry that we have to fight, that it isn't just something that the boss does without pressure, but we have the vehicle to fight and we are using it. So let's turn, a lot of you have been putting questions in the Q&A. We've been trying to sort through them and pull out some that are appearing frequently, and Nivedita and Sharon are going to take us through some of those, and I guess you'll just read them out. So take it away, Nivedita.
Thank you, Barbara. So yes, we have been gathering the questions. There are a whole lot of them. So maybe we won't get to all of them, but we are trying to get to some of the more representative ones. The first question, which I somehow suspect, Barbara, you might have an answer to, comes from Jacqueline Kelly. The question is, what is impact bargaining?
Oh, okay, great. Thanks for the question. Impact bargaining is a term under the law about collective bargaining that under the law, unions are entitled to call for bargaining outside of negotiating a contract. I mean, the two sides can always bargain if they decide to of their own. And we have done a lot of agreements with Cuny when we're not in contract bargaining. We've just come together to do things like phased retirement and stuff. We just decided to come together. But under the law, if there is a change in the conditions of work that is imposed by the employer, and certain changes come under those categories, the union can call for impact bargaining to bargain over the impact of those changes. We might not, we couldn't bargain over whether there was a pandemic, but we can bargain over the impact of those changes on our workforce. So if they have people working remotely, and Andrea spoke about this earlier, we bargained with them to get a remote work agreement that each person working remotely could sign to put in their individual flexible schedule. So impact bargaining is an additional arena for collective bargaining where unions are empowered to demand negotiations over the impact of changes that are imposed on us in the workforce. And we've had plenty of changes imposed on us, and that's why we are in impact bargaining on health and safety and on other things too that we've been working on and still have a few coming up.
Thank you, Barbara. The next question, which maybe James or one of the other incoming officers might want to address. I mean, it's a question that has been, that we have been addressing throughout, but it needs to be asked again. It comes from Andrew Palladino. How will college presidents and campus management be held accountable to actually implement all of the proposed upgrades, changes to buildings and grounds?
Thanks. I can start on that one if anybody else wants to jump in. Thanks for the question, Andrew. So, I mean, the one thing to understand on the front end is that the local administration is not being asked to fully reopen. They're being asked to open incrementally, and the pressure that we can apply and the leverage we have is to make sure that any facility or part of a facility that they're trying to open is safe. The burden is on the employer to demonstrate and document the safety of any workspace. So some of that leverage that we have is, as Penny spoke to, the local pressure that we can bring to bear on the administration. There may be administrations that are rushing too hastily to open up a section of a building or an entire building, and that's a place that we need to troubleshoot. But I don't think we should anticipate that an entire campus is going to have the doors thrown open on August 2nd, or for that matter, at the beginning of the academic year. That would be disastrous. Other thing I wanted to say, and it hasn't come up yet tonight, but maybe because it's been everywhere in the conversation for the past several months, is the federal pandemic funding. You should know at this point how much federal pandemic relief funds your campus is allocated through the most recent American Rescue Plan and the CRISA Act, and you should apply local pressure on your campuses to free those funds. So we've been talking centrally, obviously, about the $800+ million that's available in institutional funds to the university. Those funds are actually earmarked per campus, as many of you know. So putting pressure on your local administration, both to open only the facilities that can be made safe and to make them safe by using the federal pandemic relief funds. That is partly what they're there for. That's a big portion, I think, of the leverage that we have. So thanks, Andrew, for asking.
Hello, everybody. I have a couple of questions about ventilation, and maybe our ventilation experts will be ready. From Christine Klusko-Stefano and from Ben Chitty. How do we know what's acceptable ventilation? How do we check the air exchange? How can we confirm outside air supply? Tell us about ventilation.
Jean? Yeah, I'll go ahead and start. That will be done by, there's different ways to do it. The most direct way to do it is to contact the facilities folks at your specific location, and they should know this. If they don't know this or say that it's not possible, that's a red flag, and we will make note of that and press that further. And one of the things we want to do, and the other thing is, we have also heard that apparently consultants have been on a lot of campuses, or there's been a fairly extensive project to do ventilation audits. We don't know details, but we will get the results because we can get the results. It'll take a little time. So we don't know the extent of that, whether it's done by room or not. So that's, so there's also the possibility of getting that. It's sort of a special case. They hired somebody to come in and do these sorts of audits. But going forward in the future, what we really want to do is to train CUNY to expect these questions from us, to keep that pressure on them, because this is something that, that was let go for decades. And so, and this is, and we'll be talking about this more at the walkthrough training that we will be doing next Thursday. And if you can't make that one, because I know it's a busy week, we will be having more of them. But that's, this is something that we expect going forward, and we will make an effort to make that clear and get that data. Joan, do you have anything to add?
I think that's great, and I'm trying to get in as many as we can. So let's try to, can we go on to the next one, Sharon?
Sure. There are several questions about accommodations and the connections with accommodations and remote work requests. Maureen Kelly, Candace Shepard. What about comorbidities, or if you're over 65, can you be forced to come to campus if you can do your job remotely? What do you do if your supervisor refuses to approve your remote work request? How do you request an accommodation? Who is it who handles accommodations? Is it your supervisor? Is it HR? And what does CUNY have in the way of information about what accommodations they're prepared to give?
Okay, I'll do a part of that quickly because I did address some of it earlier on, and maybe a couple of people joined late. I know people are teaching and taking care of kids, so it's great you joined whenever you've joined. So on accommodations, it is HR on the college that handles accommodation requests. There is a form on the CUNY website, and maybe when we do FAQs from tonight, which we're going to put on the website, we can put a link to that form. We have pushed CUNY centrally to have uniformity and good decision-making at the HR offices across the university, not this patchwork of different approaches. And so that's where you go. And we have called on CUNY to pay very close attention to comorbidities as they're defined by the CDC, to listen to those needs that people have. And after all, we will all be better off if everyone is kept safe. And I'll just pop in another thing, maybe Andrea will talk about the form, but I know some people are concerned about the vaccine itself and whether it will remain effective. I certainly, I'm not a scientist, I don't know, and I think no one knows how long the vaccine will be effective. And certainly in our standards, we've tried to take account of that to say that there has to be time off from work to get the vaccine, and also any boosters that are needed. And there have to be paid sick days if you don't have them already. If you're in a part-time title, there have to be paid sick days if you have a reaction to the vaccination. So while we don't have all the information yet about efficacy, we are supporting, facilitating vaccination, and mindful that there may be boosters, and we want to build that into our protections and our standards. So Andrea, do you want to say anything on the other part about the form?
No, I think, but I did want to say it is really true. We have to remember that this is a changing situation, right? Everybody says it, but August is a ways off from now. And when Cuny says that, and that's one thing we agree on, that things are changing really quickly. So yeah, we have our standards now, we have our recommendations now. I'm sorry, but I didn't catch the remote question, but I did want to say that we have to be, vigilant with staying on top of the science and watching our workplaces.
Great. Sharon, maybe we can do one more because we're getting close to our time. Or Nivedita.
Here's one. Is there a deadline? Do we know what the timeline is for people to be told if they're going to be required to come to work in person?
Yes. In our remote work agreement, we have called for a notification period. We're actually calling Cuny in our standards for no later than July 2nd. That would give you a month. Our remote work agreement is supposed to be in place no more than 14 days with your total schedule. There's a part in that agreement for what hours and what days you'll work. And also that agreement preserves what I call the right to disconnect. It names that just because you are working at home, it does not mean that you are available 50, 60 hours a week. HEOs, CLTs, you still have the 35-hour work week, and you have the right to disconnect and no more hours wherever they take place. They cannot bleed into your entire week. And we have called for 14 days advance notice on those forms. If there's an emergency, 7, but we are also calling on management. Since they've given August 2nd, we have time now. We're calling for all those arrangements to be made by July 2nd. One more quick one and then we'll close it out, James? Or should we go right to that? Sharon?
Well, here's another remote work agreement. What if you approach your supervisor about entering into agreement to work remotely and they deny it? What would be the next step? Is there a way we can challenge that?
Andrea?
I mean, I can start on that. It's an agreement. It isn't a contractual demand that we won. And believe me, as always, we came in with one version of the form. Cuny came in with another version. And, Cuny was interested in things like making sure people don't steal up, get a laptop and then move to California with it and they never get their laptop back. And that's the kind of thing Cuny makes sure that you don't get hurt at home and you don't sue them. So I'm sorry, but those are some of the things Cuny was concerned about. We were concerned about you being able to work at home, of course, having a safe workplace at home, but having an agreement that you would make with the supervisor and protect your contractual rights, even if you're working at home. So those are some of the important things in the agreement that you could look at. It is important for you to try to work this out with the supervisor. I mean, that is the step, and there's no, we haven't bargained with Cuny a whole bunch of what ifs, but we can, I think we addressed this a little bit earlier also. I mean, you can certainly, we have active chapters. We have active chapters on every campus. We have watchdogs on every campus. We have we have our experts at the PSC. There's human resources. There may be different ways to work out an agreement. but there are 2 signatures needed on that form. So if your request, depends on the reason that you're, contesting what the supervisor wants you to do, let's say, it really depends on the reason. We talked about it earlier. If it's a medical reason, if you're living with someone has compromised family members or something like that, that would, sort of depend on what your approach should be. But if you feel that you really have a right or should be working at home and you aren't essential in the workplace and you have reasons for that, you should try to work that out with your supervisor.
I think we should, since we're almost at 8:30, we do want to, I know there are many other questions, and thank you everyone who behind the scenes has been reading through all your questions and trying to pull the ones out that are most frequently asked. We will try to answer as many as we can, and as many of the pre-submitted ones on some FAQs on the website, and also the detailed slides that Jean and Joan showed of the elaboration of our standards, health and safety standards, will be on our website either tomorrow or over the weekend, just getting the framing right. And so you'll be able to see those details. And I just wanted to say one thing that hadn't come up, and then James and I are going to talk about very quickly about some next steps. Adjuncts, I think there's a concern, and Rachel Riss asked this before about the contingent workers. We have insisted with Cuny and pushed and pushed. We are still pushing to get rehired the adjuncts who were laid off last June. We were working on that. We were working on it through US Congress and some other places, and through the city and state, still pushing on that. And we also have been very conscious and working to make sure that management does not take advantage of contingency to put special pressures on part-time workers, contingent workers, to take assignments that you do not feel are safe. If you are a part-timer, faculty or staff, NTA, listening to this right now, do not feel that you have to accept something that is not safe. We are all in this, we all have the same right and need for safety, and our commitment to enforcement goes for everyone. So Cuny should not be allowed to get away with anything that compromises any of us, and that includes whatever your job position is. So there's a lot more to ask and say, but we're going to try to finish in a pretty timely way. So James and I are going to talk about some next steps very briefly, and I think we'll put a couple slides up and finish off with that. So Fran Clark, if you could put up the first one. Great, it's coming. Okay, whoops, it's a little small. Okay. Let me see if that's great. Thanks, Fran. We divided these into 2 groups. June 15th is the date that the college reopening plans are due. So there are certain things that we, and I say we as a soon to be rank and file activist rather than union president, but we will be doing, and the union leadership and chapters. And you just heard from chapter activists tonight. There's a set of things we want to do by June 15th, which includes publicizing the safety standards. We need to negotiate protocols on walkthroughs with Cuny. We're starting down that. We have some things we want to do with the chapters. A big issue that came up tonight was protecting teaching modalities. That's if you're already scheduled for a hybrid class, it should not be suddenly turned into an in-person or high flex class. You've heard about training, health and safety, my dream, 30,000 people trained in health and safety. We definitely want to dig deeper and dig in, as you heard tonight, on strike readiness. I hope, and I think we all hope, that we can be safe at work, and we can do that without having to use a very serious weapon, especially in New York State, a strike, and those are prohibited under the Taylor law, but we have come close. We came very close over the Hunter campus schools on safety. But the only way to be in any position to do that is to be readiness. And James talked to be ready. And James talked about how we need to dig in and be ready, building that power and building our local power, which will help us whether we have to take escalated action or not. It will help us on the ground. And then we're also going to meet with our allies. And as James said, the Executive Council will be considering where to go on escalation, including whether we need to take a strike authorization vote. But what I think I want to leave you with for going to June 15th is we need to educate ourselves and also develop the kind of muscle locally and knowledge that you heard about tonight. And that's something we can all do with each other as teachers, as scholars, as educators, as counselors. We're in a great position to do that. Turn it over to James for where we go from there.
Okay, thanks. And Fran, if you could just advance to the next slide. The reason, as Barbara said, the reason that the first slide uses the threshold of June 15th. I mean, there are some really important threshold moments over the summer that we need to kind of key our work around. CUNY colleges are submitting their reopening plans on June 15th. Those will go to the Office of the Chief Operating Officer to review and approve or request revisions, but we want to be ready by the time they're submitted in order to do the many things on the previous slide. Obviously, has been said, the week of August 2nd, folks who have not already been called back to work are going to begin to be called back incrementally. So there's a series then of additional steps that we want to be prepared for, some centrally and some in the chapters. One, and this goes to the communication question, we need to improve our ability to communicate between chapters and PSC Central, and also laterally among chapters, and be able to share information in something closer to real time, monitoring facilities and troubleshooting as we need to. We also want to try to monitor the implementation. People have been talking about the remote work agreements, to be able to work with HR at CUNY and locally to support our members as they need support. We need to continue walkthroughs. Just because we got permission to do pre-occupancy walkthroughs, which is a huge thing, that doesn't mean that those facilities are going to remain safe forever going forward. So we also need to continue on the walkthrough routines, beyond the summer. We're eager to continue with labor management meetings centrally with CUNY, and also to negotiate a protocol. Some people were asking about COVID testing in the workplace. That's something that the employer is compelled by law to negotiate with us as the labor representative. So we're looking to do that. And finally, but not least, to develop a media plan so that we can outreach about our safety issues as it's needed. CUNY may need to be shamed into compliance in various ways. And so we can use our media plan in order to address that as we need to. So that's all we wanted to cover. Obviously, our plans need to go far beyond August 2nd, but as a preliminary sketch, we wanted to share that with everyone. Thank you.
That's great. And if you can take that down, Fran, we can just make it under 8:35. Thank you, everybody, so much. I know we didn't get to all the questions, and there's a lot of richness here. We didn't get to all the stories of the work on campus, which I think are beautiful, important stories, and there are many, many more of them. So watch their website where the safety standards in their full glory will be put up. Thank you, health and safety coordinators. Thank you, fellow officers. There will be more. And we've got the power. I mean, Kelly Spivey said this earlier. We have a lot of power. Don't underestimate that. We have used it to keep people safe so far. I mean, that's what we've done all year. And we're ready for this. We are ready for this PSC, and we can be even more ready. So I think we're in a strong position, and doing it together is an incredible privilege for us. And we have a strong vehicle in the union, so let's use it. And I just want to say in closing how thrilling it is to be able to work even on this one night with the incoming officers. I think you can see what wonderful leadership you will have with James and Andrea continuing, and Felicia and Penny. We're all lucky to have them, lucky to have each other. And maybe we could unmute and go out with a chant. Could we try it? Can we do that? Instead of just wandering away. Okay, can we try students, faculty, staff unite? Same struggle, same fight. Are we unmuting, Fran?
It might be hard. Unmute 830 people.
No, I think we're ready. All right,
Okay.
we'll try it, okay?
Okay.
So thank you, everyone. Students, faculty, staff unite.
Enemy.
Students, faculty, staff unite.
Thank you. Good night. Good night, everyone.
everyone.
struggle, same
Same
fight.
Students.
Faculty, staff
Good
unite.
Struggle,
Fight.
same
Thank you,
fight.
everyone. Bye.
Our
Good night,
family.
everyone.
Bye.
Be well, be strong. Be well, stay safe. Good night.
Let me go, please, let me go.